Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Before we get underway today, I'd like to take a brief moment to recognize the terrible loss of life that occurred just a few miles away from here last night. Our hearts and prayers are with the families and friends who lost loved ones last night, as well as the brave first responders who are still on the scene. I'd like to ask everyone to join us in a moment of silent prayer and reflection for the souls lost. Thank you. Next, I want to remind everyone in attendance here that while you are all welcome to observe today's hearing, I will not allow or tolerate disruptions from the audience. Audience members may not verbally or physically distract from the hearing, including by shouting, standing, raising signs, or making gestures that block the view of other members of the audience or the cameras for those watching on television or online. Anyone who does so will be removed immediately by the Capitol Police and banned from return. Welcome everyone to this hearing on President Trump's nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Intelligence. Ms. Gabbard, welcome to the Senate Intelligence Committee. I also want to welcome your family in attendance today, including your husband, Abraham, your mother, Carol, and your sister, friend Dobbin. I also want to acknowledge some very special friends of yours, Dakota Myers and Pat Payne, both Medal of Honor recipients. Gentlemen, on behalf of the grateful nation, I extend my deepest thanks to you and the heroes with whom you served. I also note that our next Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is joining us. Apparently, she didn't have enough fun at her own confirmation hearing. Ms. Bondi, welcome and congratulations. And finally, Senator Joni Ernst and former Senator and Chairman of this committee, Richard Burr, will introduce Ms. Gabbard shortly. We look forward to your remarks. I think it's fair to say that Ms. Gabbard's nomination has generated a bit more interest and attention than do most nominees before this committee. But I want to stress that Ms. Gabbard has been and will be treated with the exact same respect, consideration, and professionalism that we extended to every nominee. No more, no less, no better, no worse. That's how we treated CIA Director John Ratcliffe just 2 weeks ago, and how we have treated DNI nominees like Avril Haines and Dan Coates in the past. For instance, Ms. Gabbard has conducted dozens of office meetings with senators. She has completed the committee's standard questionnaire. She has answered 247 questions in writing. This is all in keeping with the committee's customs, precedents, and rules. Before I address the important work ahead at the DNI, please also let me make two observations about some of the accusations about Ms. Gabbard. First, I'm dismayed by the attacks on Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and her loyalty to our country. For instance, Hillary Clinton has smeared Ms. Gabbard, calling her an asset of a foreign nation. Let me remind everyone that Ms. Gabbard has served in our Army for more than 2 decades. She has multiple combat tours, and she still wears the uniform to this day. She has undergone 5 FBI background checks. I spent more than 2 hours last week reviewing the latest, putting eyes on more than 300 pages. It's clean as a whistle. It's fine that we have differences of opinions on policies and programs. I suspect some of my Republican colleagues might disagree with some of Mrs. Gabbard's votes in the House of Representatives. Just as I suspect that some of my Democratic colleagues might criticize Ms. Gabbard's statements and actions since she saw the light and left the Democratic Party. But I sincerely hope that no one today will impugn Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and integrity. Second, I can only laugh at some critics who say that Ms. Gabbard has unconventional views. No doubt she has some unconventional views, like her criticism of Barack Obama's regime change interventions in Egypt and Libya. But guess what? I opposed the disastrous interventions in Egypt and Libya as well. Mubarak was a longtime American partner, and Egypt was a linchpin of our security system in the Middle East. Gaddafi had been scared straight after we toppled the Taliban and Saddam Hussein. He turned over his weapons of mass destruction and cooperated against terrorists. In return, we had lifted sanctions and reestablished diplomatic ties. But President Obama intervened to topple both regimes. And what came next? The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and dangerous chaos in Libya to this day. No one ever mistook Mubarak or Gaddafi as the little sisters of the poor. But let's not kid ourselves. The world is a dangerous place, not a church picnic. Ms. Gabbard understands this, which is why she also saw the problem with regime change interventions in these places. The vast number of governments throughout history and still today are not democratic. We may wish it were different, and we can work to improve it, but that's the way the world is. If we only befriended nations that shared our system of government and our social and cultural sensibilities, well, we wouldn't have many friends. In a fallen world, we have to take our friends where we find them. No question, stable democracies make the most stable friends, but what matters in the end is less whether a country is democratic or non-democratic, and more whether the country is pro-American or anti-American. I'll confess that those views may be somewhat unconventional, but look at where conventional thinking has got us. Maybe Washington could use a little more unconventional thinking. And I'm sure that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence could use more unconventional thinking. Ms. Gabbard, I submit that if confirmed, the measure of your success will largely depend on whether you can return the ODNI to its original size, scope, and mission. When Congress created the ODNI, we intended to put one office in charge to manage the different agencies of the intelligence community. Congress intended the ODNI to be a very lean organization that would use small staffs to execute specific tasks. Congress in no way wanted yet another unruly bureaucracy layered on top of an already bureaucratic intelligence community. Unfortunately, 20 years later, that's exactly what the ODNI has become. Incredibly, the ODNI now is now larger than any agencies it was established to manage. It has 15 offices and centers, which have many subunits within them. The ODNI staff is measured in the thousands, when it should be measured in the dozens, or maybe a few hundred. I promise that's going to change. I intend to get personnel at the ODNI back to their home agencies doing real intelligence work, not bureaucratic make work. I also expect to cap the size of the ODNI. Ms. Gabbard, if confirmed, I hope you'll be a partner in these vital efforts. Another example of bureaucratic mission creep and empire building is what's come to be known in the intelligence community as DNI taxes. The ODNI levies these so-called taxes on other agencies, shifting and directing funds away from the intelligence community's core mission to the whims and fancies of any particular DNI. That practice, which seems to have grown and run rampant under Director Haynes, is also going to stop. Ms. Gabbard, if confirmed, you have a lot of work ahead of you. And as chairman of this committee, I'm committed to ensuring that we see it all the way through. At this moment, I'll now recognize Senator Risch for a brief statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And I want to thank Ms. Gabbard for meeting with me and having the candid conversation we did on the issues. Unfortunately, I have to chair the Foreign Relations Committee. We have our first substantive meeting today on malign influence of China here at home and abroad. So I'm not going to be able to stay for the hearing. I'm not going to get a chance to ask questions. However, we are going to have a closed session immediately following, and the questions I have trespass upon the security of the country, and as a result of that, they need to be done in a classified setting in any event. So if I beg indulgence to be excused to preside over the other committee, good luck. I know you'll do well. Thank you.
You are excused.
I was going to leave whether you excuse me or not, but thank you very much.
I will now recognize the Vice Chairman, Senator Warner, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and particularly thank your comments at the top. I've spent most of the morning out at National Airport. I know Senator Moran was there last night. It's a horrible tragedy. The victims' families are still being notified. For those of us who live in this region, you know, it's always kind of complicated. We've got Virginia, D.C., Maryland, and a host of local jurisdictions. But last night, when this tragedy took place, and I happened to be driving by National on the way home and saw all the first responders rushing to the scene. People came from as far away as Baltimore, Fairfax County. We had DOD and federal officials there. And these first responders, as always, ran towards the tragedy. There'll be a time to figure out what happened and how we rectify it. But today, our thoughts and prayers ought to be with the families and, again, thanking our first responders. Ms. Gabbard, welcome. And congratulations on your nomination to be the next Director of National Intelligence. I'd like to begin by thanking you, literally, for your decades of public service, both in uniform and as a member of Congress from Hawaii. I applaud your continuing commitment to serve should you be confirmed. Now, the President has nominated you to be Director of National Intelligence. Most folks probably don't understand the importance of this position. If confirmed, you would lead 18 agencies of the IC. You'll also serve as the principal advisor to the President, the National Security Council, and the Homeland Security Council for all intelligence matters related to national security. And in this role, you'll be responsible for over $100 billion between the National Intelligence Program and the Military Intelligence Program, or the NIP and the MIP as we call them here. It's a position of great importance and significance to our national security, created after one of our worst national security failures, 9/11. For that reason, when Congress established this position, thanks in large part to our colleague and our friend Susan Collins, it mandated in law that any individual nominated for this position must have, and I quote, extensive national security expertise. Now, I appreciated you taking the time to meet with me, and as I noted in that office, both before and after, I continue to have significant concerns about your judgment and your qualifications to meet the standards set by law. First, as I noted previously, the DNI was created in part to make sure we had appropriate intelligence sharing, which prior to 9/11, obviously we haven't. But the mission also is to not only share information between the IC, but also with our allies. There's no legal requirement that our allies share intelligence with us. It's all predicated on trust. Trust that our allies will protect each other's secrets. Yet it appears to me you have repeatedly excused our adversaries' worst actions, and instead often blamed them on the United States and those very allies. For example, you blame NATO for Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. You rejected the conclusion that Assad used chemical weapons in Syria, despite it being the unanimous assessment of the then Trump administration's DOD, State Department, and IC, as well as the assessment of our European allies. Instead, you blame the United States for supporting terrorist groups in Syria. Now, I don't know if your intent in making those statements was to defend those dictators, or if you were simply unaware of the intelligence and how your statements would be perceived. in either case, it raises, at least for this senator, serious questions about your judgment. It also leads me to question whether you can develop the trust necessary to give our allies confidence that they can share their most sensitive intelligence with us. Make no mistake about it. If they stop sharing that intelligence, the United States will be less safe. We've seen this as recently as this past year, where because of those strong intelligence sharing between the United States and Austria, countless lives were saved by disrupting a terrorist attack that was going to take place at the Taylor Swift concert in Vienna. Second, you have been publicly outspoken in your praise and defense of Edward Snowden, someone who betrayed the trust of our nation and jeopardized the security of our country. The truth is, the vast majority of the information he stole and leaked before running off to China and Russia, might I add, had nothing to do with Americans' privacy and compromised our most important sources and methods. And in many ways, we're still paying a price for that. And I believe that Edward Snowden's action put our men and women in uniform in places like Iraq and Afghanistan at risk. You have celebrated Snowden as a, quote, brave whistleblower, and actually put forward legislation asking for his pardon. Furthermore, when given the opportunity to clarify your position in pre-hearing questions, you declined. And instead, you expressed, and again, I quote, the DNI has no role in determining whether or not Edward Snowden is a lawful whistleblower. Well, that is troubling to me in so many ways. Not only do you think that someone who divulged secrets and then ran off to Russia should be celebrated as brave, but you don't seem to understand the DNI's role in determining whistleblower determinations. In fact, the DNI has a significant role in transmitting lawful whistleblower complaints to this committee. They're all laid out right here in the statute. And I would have serious concerns about confirming someone who cannot distinguish between complaints that are made lawfully and those that are made not. In the statute, it says the job of the DNI is to protect intelligence sources and methods from unauthorized disclosure. That's a quote. I guess I'm asking, what message would it send to have a DNI who would celebrate the work of a member of the IC or a contractor that would, on their own mission, to decide what's appropriate to leak? I don't understand that. Third, until recently, you had a clear and consistent record of opposing FISA 702. I know members on this committee already understand how important this is, but for folks who don't, this law is critical to our national security. Literally 60% on average of what goes into the president's daily brief, what President Trump will read each day in assessing what's going on in the world, comes from this important piece of law that allows us to seek out those foreigners abroad for coverage. And it's helped prevent terrorist attacks. It helps us prevent foreign cyber attacks. It helps us on a topic that a lot of folks are looking at, fentanyl trafficking. Now, many in this Congress and many on the committee have tried to reform this legislation to better balance security and civil liberties. However, you have consistently gone further. Not only did you vote against reauthorizing 702, you actually introduced legislation to fully repeal the whole thing, calling it again, quote, a blatant disregard for our Fourth Amendment constitutional rights. Now, I understand that since you've been nominated to be DNI, you've expressed a change of heart. I think that's welcome, but I have to tell you, as I view this as a job interview, as I try to make my judgment on whether you should be confirmed, I don't find your change of heart credible. Because the world today is more complex and more dangerous than ever before. And we need serious people with sufficient experience to be able to navigate that complexity. I hope you use this opportunity to address my concerns and all of the members of this committee. I appreciate again your service, and I'm looking forward to a thorough discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. We welcome back Senator Richard Burr, the former chairman of this committee who has emerged from retirement to introduce Ms. Gabbard. Yet still, in retirement, he still seems unable to find a pair of socks. Nonetheless, we say thank you and welcome you back, Senator Burr.
Some things are very predictable, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman Cotton, Vice Chairman Warner, members of this distinguished committee, I want to thank you for allowing me to join you today to provide my thoughts and support on behalf of Tulsi Gabbard's nomination to be Director of National Intelligence. This is my first visit back to the Senate in slightly over 2 years. Permit me to say, from this side of the dais, you're not as intimidating as I thought when I was on your side of the dais. When I was chairman of this committee, Senator Warner and I stuck to a single refrain with our staff: follow the facts wherever they lead. Today, an anonymous person or group launching a campaign using rumors as sources and accusations as fact can drive the outcome of an election and of public opinion. I know it to be true. Remember, I sat in your chair for the Russia investigation, where we found much of the influence to be the result of fictitious narratives driven by Russia. Now, some of you may be wondering, why do I support Tulsi Gabbard, and why am I here to introduce her as a nominee? I've experienced firsthand a coordinated attempt to influence this nominee's support in the United States Senate and with the American people. I was contacted by several national journalists shortly after the president nominated Tulsi, asking me to confirm one of the many rumors circulating about this nominee. I informed each journalist over a 5-week period that the rumors shared with me was simply not true. This narrative was shared from one journalist to the next journalist to the next journalist. I assume today they ran out of journalists. This was a coordinated effort to kill this nomination. Advise and consent is the responsibility of the United States Senate, and I truly believe that each member takes it seriously. All members of this committee were offered the opportunity for individual meetings with Tulsi, and if you chose not to meet with her, it's on you. I've done my homework, and here are the facts. Tulsi Gabbard's historic life began at birth. She's the first American Samoan-born member of Congress, period. She graduated from Hawaii Pacific University with a degree in business administration with a concentration in international business. In 2002, at age 21, Tulsi became the youngest woman in America ever elected as a state representative. That was not enough. In 2003, she joined the Hawaii National Guard. When deployed, in her re-election, her opponent raised the issue, could you serve the people that elected you if, in fact, you were deployed? What did Tulsi do? She withdrew from her re-election campaign in order to continue to serve our country in the war on terror. This would not be the first or the last time Tulsi put her country above her career. After multiple deployments and serving in the Hawaii City Council, she was elected to the United States House of Representatives, where she served 4 terms. Throughout her political career, she maintained her military service either in the National Guard or the Army Reserve. Media stories and anonymous rumors have questioned her qualifications, her patriotism, and whether she can be trusted, just to name a few. I refuse to question the qualifications of a woman who's worn the uniform of her nation for 22 years and never taken it off. No fewer than 5 times has the Department of Defense reviewed her security clearance and extended it. Every single time. If Tulsi's guilty of anything, it's that since she was born, her views, opinions, and beliefs have evolved to reflect her life's experiences. Winston Churchill once said, those that never change their minds never change anything. She served her city, her state, her country, while winning the support of the people she represented. She's fought in war, and yes, she's tried to stop wars. At the ripe age of 43, Tulsi has the life experiences that match or exceed most members of Congress. Tulsi was serving in uniform 3 years before some of us here today voted to create the Director of National Intelligence. Chairman Cotton, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, it's my honor to support and to introduce to the committee Lieutenant Colonel Tulsi Gabbard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Burr. Now our colleague, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, has taken a few minutes out of her very busy schedule to be here to introduce Ms. Gabbard as well. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Chairman Cotton and Ranking Member Warner. And good morning to my distinguished colleagues. I also do want to take a moment this morning to recognize the lives that were lost in the collision near DCA last night. It is a truly heartbreaking tragedy. My prayers are with the victims' families and their loved ones. So thank you. Duty, honor, service. These are not just words. They are principles that have guided Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard. As a young enlisted soldier in the Hawaii National Guard, Tulsi answered the call to duty upon her deployments to the Middle East. From graduating at the top of her class from the Accelerated Officer Candidate School at the Alabama Military Academy, the first woman to do so, to serving as the youngest member of Hawaii's legislature, she upheld honor while breaking barriers both in uniform and in her civilian leadership roles. And today, Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard demonstrates her commitment to service by sitting before this committee, prepared to answer the nation's call yet once again, this time as the next Director of National Intelligence. Tulsi and I share similar backgrounds, both to our nation and to our communities. We've worn the same uniforms, serving in the Army National Guard and Army Reserves, leading battalions and deploying to Iraq and Kuwait. We've both had the privilege of serving in our state legislatures and in Congress, representing the people who shaped our lives and our communities. Tulsi exemplifies what it means to rise above partisanship, putting the needs of the American people over political divisions. She put her own life on the line in combat operations and now has set aside partisan differences as a former Democrat member of Congress to answer the call to serve in a Republican administration. The mainstream media has fought to paint their own picture of Tulsi Gabbard. But let's talk about the real Tulsi Gabbard, the woman and the soldier who I've come to know and respect. And I've known Tulsi for the past decade. Relationships matter. In 2015, then Congresswoman Gabbard met my dear friend Owen, who was a dear friend of mine from Iowa State University. Owen was a wounded special operations warrior who embodies the resilience and strength of our military community. Owen was the subject of an attack in Afghanistan where he lost his leg and his left eye serving in the war. After this attack, or during this attack, Owen was tossed into the dead pile Owen, bleeding and in excruciating pain, cried out to his teammates, "I'm not dead." Thankfully, his fellow warfighter attended to Owen. But the road to recovery was long and hard, including a stint at Walter Reed Medical Center. During this time, Owen met a fellow warrior and patriot, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who became a friend, and today they remain in touch. Owen prides himself in being a very good judge of character. And Tulsi, he speaks volumes of your character. Owen's final message to me before this hearing was, Tulsi has maintained her integrity throughout her career. She's the same gal I met in 2015. She always makes time for our old, broken warriors. And colleagues, I will leave you with this. You know me. I trust Tulsi Gabbard. She will be honest with you. She will listen to your concerns. She will be receptive to your feedback. And rest assured, Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard loves this country, a fact proven by her willingness to put her life on the line to defend it. For over 20 years, she has put on the uniform and checked her political views at the door with one mission in mind: to protect and defend our great United States of America. Tulsi, duty, honor, and service have marked your life. Thank you for your extraordinary dedication to our nation, for embodying the values that make our military the best in the world, and for stepping up to serve yet once again as President Trump's Director of National Intelligence. Relationships matter. I urge my colleagues to support this nomination. My best wishes to you, Tulsi, and to your family. God bless our country. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. I know that Senator Ernst has a busy schedule to include a hearing for Dan Driscoll, the Secretary of Army nominee at the Armed Services Committee. I'm sure Senator Burr has to go on a fishing trip or something. So we will excuse both senators from the witness table. Ms. Gabbard, before we move to your opening statement, it is the custom of the committee to ask a series of obligatory questions to all nominees. First, do you swear or affirm to give this committee your full and truthful testimony?
I do.
Second, do you agree to appear before the committee here or in other venues when invited?
Yes.
Third, if confirmed, do you agree to send officials from your office to appear before the committee and designated staff when invited?
Yes.
Fourth, do you agree to provide documents or any materials requested by the committee in order for it to carry out its oversight and legislative responsibilities?
I do.
Fifth, will you ensure that your office and your staff provide such material to the committee when requested?
Yes.
Sixth, do you agree to inform and fully brief, to the fullest extent possible, all members of this committee on intelligence activities and covert actions rather than only the chairman and the vice chairman?
Yes.
Thank you for those answers, Ms. Gabbard. We now welcome the opportunity, finally, to hear from you in your own words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I too would like to start by offering my prayers and condolences to those who were killed in last night's horrific crash. Senator Warner, Senator Moran, our condolences and prayers are with you and all of your constituents. Again, Chairman Cotton, Vice Chairman Warner, and all of the members of the committee, it's an honor to be here before you today. I've appreciated the opportunity to meet with so many of you and address your questions and concerns before today's hearing. I know they've gone, but I'm grateful to Senators Burr and Ernst for their trust and their confidence in taking time to join us here today. To my husband, Abraham, my family, friends, fellow veterans, Medal of Honor recipients, and patriots, thank you for your love and support. I'm honored and grateful to President Trump for his trust and confidence in nominating me to serve our country as the Director of National Intelligence at a time when trust in the intelligence community, unfortunately, is at an all-time low. Chuck Schumer admitted a few years ago, quote, "You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you." For too long, faulty, inadequate, or weaponized intelligence have led to costly failures and the undermining of our national security and God-given freedoms enshrined in the Constitution. The most obvious example of one of these failures is our invasion of Iraq based upon a total fabrication or complete failure of intelligence. This disastrous decision led to the deaths of tens of thousands of American soldiers, millions of people in the Middle East, mass migration, destabilization, and undermining of the security and stability of our European allies, the rise of ISIS, strengthening of al-Qaeda and other Islamist jihadist groups, and strengthening Iran. Here are just a few other examples. The American people elected Donald Trump as their president not once but twice, and yet the FBI and intelligence agencies were politicized by his opponents to undermine his presidency and falsely portray him as a puppet of Putin. Title I of FISA was used illegally to obtain a warrant to spy on Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, using a Clinton campaign-funded false dossier as their so-called evidence. Biden campaign advisor Tony Blinken was the impetus for the 51 former senior intelligence officials' letter dismissing Hunter Biden's laptop as disinformation specifically to help Biden win the election. Former DNI James Clapper lied to this committee in 2013, denying the existence of programs that facilitated the mass collection of millions of Americans' phone and internet records, yet was never held accountable. Under John Brennan's leadership, the CIA abused its power to spy on Congress, to dodge oversight, lied about doing it until he was caught, and yet has never been held responsible. Under Biden, the FBI abused its power for political reasons to try to surveil Catholics who attend traditional Latin Mass, labeling them as quote-unquote radical traditionalist Catholics. Personally, just 24 hours after I criticized Kamala Harris and her nomination, I was placed on a secret domestic terror watch list called Quiet Skies. Sadly, there are more examples. The bottom line is this must end. President Trump's re-election is a clear mandate from the American people to break this cycle of failure, end the weaponization and politicization of the intelligence community, and begin to restore trust in those who've been charged with the critical task of securing our nation. If confirmed as DNI, I will do my very best to fulfill this mandate and bring leadership to the intelligence community with a laser-like focus on our essential mission, ensuring the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. As the President's principal intelligence advisor, I'll begin by leading by example, checking my own personal views at the door, and committing to delivering intelligence that is collected, analyzed, and reported without bias, prejudice, or political influence. I enlisted in the Army because of the horrific terrorist attack on September 11th and volunteered to deploy to Iraq in 2005, where I served in a medical unit. After nearly 22 years in uniform with 3 combat deployments to the Middle East and Africa, I'm now a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, where I serve as a battalion commander of soldiers in Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas. I served in Congress for 8 years on the Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, and Armed Services committees. And it's my experience in the military and in the halls of Congress that have given me a deep understanding of the complex challenges that our nation faces, in both roles engaging with world leaders, in both roles being privy to highly classified intelligence. So I know firsthand how essential accurate, unbiased, and timely intelligence is to the President, to Congress, and to our warfighters. I also know the heavy cost of intelligence failures and abuses. Senator Collins, you led the creation of ODNI specifically to address those intelligence failures of 9/11 and Iraq's so-called WMDs. The need for the ODNI under strong leadership still exists today. If confirmed, I'll bring my experience and fresh eyes to leading the intelligence community. And my day one priorities will be to assess the global threat environment, identify where gaps in our intelligence exist, integrate intelligence elements, increase information sharing, and ensure that unbiased, apolitical, objective collection and analysis to support the president and policymakers' decision-making occur. I'll work to end the politicization of the intelligence community and ensure there is a clear mission focus in the IC on its core mission of this unbiased, apolitical collection and analysis of intelligence to secure our nation. I'll work to rebuild trust through transparency and accountability. This is a national security imperative. And I'll work to assess and address efficiencies, redundancies, and effectiveness across ODNI to ensure focus of personnel and resources is on our core mission of national security. Now, in my meetings that I've had with many of you, you expressed bipartisan frustration about recent intelligence failures, as well as the lack of responsiveness to your requests for information. Whether it's the surprise October 7th Hamas terrorist attack, to the sudden takeover of Syria by Islamist extremists, failures to identify the source of COVID, anomalous health incidents, UAPs, drones, and more. If confirmed, I look forward to working with you to address these issues. Ensuring the safety, security, and freedom of the American people is a mandate of leadership that rises above partisan politics. If confirmed, my commitment to the president, to you, and to the American people is this: I will do my very best to find the truth, no matter where it leads, and share that truth with President Trump, his advisors, and you in Congress, providing you with that unbiased, timely, and accurate intelligence as you make the tough decisions that'll impact the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. Now, before I close, I want to warn the American people who are watching at home. You may hear lies and smears in this hearing that'll challenge my loyalty to and my love for our country. Those who oppose my nomination imply that I am loyal to something or someone other than God, my own conscience, and the Constitution of the United States, accusing me of being Trump's puppet, Putin's puppet, Assad's puppet, a guru's puppet, Modi's puppet, not recognizing the absurdity of simultaneously being the puppet of 5 different puppet masters. The same tactic was used against President Trump and failed. The American people elected President Trump with a decisive victory and mandate for change. The fact is, what truly unsettles my political opponents is I refuse to be their puppet. I have no love for Assad or Gaddafi or any dictator. I just hate al-Qaeda. I hate that we have leaders who cozy up to Islamist extremists, minimizing them to so-called rebels. As Jake Sullivan said to Hillary Clinton, quote, al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Well, Syria is now controlled by an al-Qaeda offshoot, HTS, led by an Islamist jihadist who danced in the streets on 9/11 and who was responsible for the killing of many American service members. Democrat senators in the past resorted to anti-Christian bigotry against some of President Trump's judicial nominees like Amy Coney Barrett and Brian Boucher. I condemned those actions as a Democrat in Congress at the time, as religious bigotry must be thoroughly condemned by all of us, no matter the religion. Unfortunately, there are some Democrat senators who still don't understand the principle of freedom of religion and Article 6 of the Constitution. Quote, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Unfortunately, they're once again using the religious bigotry card, but this time trying to foment religious bigotry against Hindus and Hinduism. If anyone is sincerely interested in knowing more about my own personal spiritual path of Hinduism, I welcome you to go to my account on X, where I'll share more on this topic. If confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will continue to live by the oath that I have sworn at least 8 times in my life, both in uniform and as a member of Congress. I will support and defend our God-given freedoms enshrined in the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gabbard. A few reminders before we begin our 5-minute round of questioning. First, a reminder to the audience, once again, I will not tolerate disruptions or disturbances either in favor of or in opposition to Ms. Gabbard. We all came to hear from Ms. Gabbard, not from you. 2 reminders to my colleagues. We'll have a 5-minute round of questions. Not 5.5, not 6, 5-minute round. We will also have a closed session after this hearing in which you'll have another 5-minute opportunity to ask questions. Second, if any question, as Senator Risch alluded to, begins to approach the line of classified material, my crack staff will advise me and I will ask you to hold the question until we get to a closed setting.
Mr. Chairman, could I just inquire? I was under the understanding that if in the open round, because this is the only time the American people will be able to see this judgment, you'd agreed if certain members needed to ask a second round of questions in the public setting, that would be available.
As is our custom, if a member waits until the end of the opening round and has a follow-up question, then we will permit that follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gabbard, if confirmed, you'll be entrusted with our nation's most important secrets. We're all entrusted with that information to serve the American people and to keep our country safe. Unfortunately, as you said in your opening statement, we've seen too many instances in recent years of people who were trusted with classified information and went on to abuse and politicize that trust. For example, in October 2020, more than 50 former intelligence officers, many of whom still held a top secret clearance, wrote a letter invoking their credentials to make false claims about Hunter Biden's laptop, likely being Russian disinformation. Do you agree that this was an example of intelligence professionals abusing and politicizing their past positions and credentials?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do, and it is an example of what needs to end and why the American people elected President Trump to bring about those necessary reforms.
Thank you. Will you commit that no one who abuses his past position and credentials in this fashion will hold a security clearance in the future?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I want to be fair to my Democratic colleagues. Such abuses aren't just a problem on the left. Also in 2020, President Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, published a book in which he revealed sensitive conversations with the president on national security matters, including highly classified information. He didn't submit this book for review and approval to ensure that our national security secrets were protected. Do you agree that John Bolton's actions likewise undermined public trust?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Will you commit that no one who so abuses his past position and risks the exposure of classified information by publishing a book without submitting it for review and getting approval before publication will hold a security clearance again or be trusted with classified information again?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's move on to the topic of OD&I reform that I mentioned in my opening statement. Congress originally envisioned the OD&I to be a small coordinating agency that directs, rather than replicates, the now 18 constituent agencies that make up our intelligence community. Over the years, however, the OD&I has strayed from this vision to an organization that now publicly boasts nearly 2,000 people, more than half of whom are not detailed from an intelligence agency, but rather are career OD&I bureaucrats. They've even developed centers that are producing their own analysis. Will you commit today to working with this committee to restoring the OD&I to its original size, scope, and function?
Yes, Senator, I look forward to working with you and the committee as I, if confirmed, assess the current status of who is working in the OD&I and the function that they fulfill to make sure of its effectiveness and elimination of redundancies and bloating.
Thank you. Do you support some of the policy proposals I mentioned in my opening statement about capping the size of the OD&I, eliminating OD&I taxes, returning employees back to their home agencies to do real intelligence work?
Yes, Senator, I look forward to working with you as we assess where the OD&I needs to be in order to fulfill its core mission and function.
Thank you. And in your preparation for this hearing and this important responsibility, have you developed any thoughts that explains the mission creep and the empire building that we've seen at the OD&I in recent years?
Yes, Senator, I've had the opportunity to review the history of the OD&I, to speak to Ambassador Negroponte, the first Director of National Intelligence, as well as others who have served in this position. I think there are a number of contributing factors to the creation of centers, or not centers, but offices like the recently eliminated Office of DEI within ODNI, and other areas where I need to go in and assess the replication and the duplication of responsibilities that exist elsewhere and some of the other intelligence elements that ODNI has oversight over.
Thank you. Colleagues, I will lead by example and yield back 1 minute of my time and recognize the Vice Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is a first. Ms. Gabbard, let me be clear, at least in my views. I salute your service to our country. But I have serious doubts about your judgment. And those are some of the areas that I want to pursue. First, until you are nominated by the President to be the DNI, you consistently praise the actions of Edward Snowden. Some who, I believe, jeopardized the security of our nation and then, in an effort to flaunt that, fled to Russia. You even called Edward Snowden, and I quote here, a brave whistleblower. Every member of this committee supports the rights of legal whistleblowers. But Edward Snowden isn't a whistleblower. And in this case, I'm a lot closer to the chairman's words, where he said Snowden is, quote, an egotistical serial liar and traitor who, quote, deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. Ms. Gabbard, a simple yes or no question. Do you still think Edward Snowden is brave?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Edward Snowden broke the law. I do not agree with or support with all of the information and intelligence that he released, nor the way in which he did it. There would have been opportunities for him to come to you on this committee or seek out the IG to release that information. The fact is, he also, even as he broke the law, released information that exposed egregious, illegal, and unconstitutional programs that are happening within our government that led to serious reforms that Congress undertook.
Chairman, we got 5 minutes. So I take your answer, and these are your quotes. Brave, please join my bipartisan legislation calling for charges to be dropped against him. Do you disagree that legislation was not appropriate? Do you believe he is brave or not?
Yeah,
Back those words?
once again, Senator, Edward Snowden broke the law. He
Ms. Gabbard,
also
I'm not
released
talking- we agree that Edward Snowden
that
broke the
exposed
law.
the United States
Asking you a
government's
question whether
illegal
your
programs.
legislation and your words are still your beliefs. Yes or no, please.
I'm making myself very clear. Edward
Ma'am.
Snowden broke the law. He released information about the United
All right,
States
ma'am, I've
government's
got other issues to
illegal
raise.
activities.
Ma'am,
If I may just finish my thoughts, Senator. In this role that I've been nominated for, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will be responsible for protecting our nation's secrets, and I have 4 immediate steps
ask for
that I
additional
would
time.
take to
Chairman.
prevent another Snowden-like leak.
Ma'am, I would simply ask you again. I don't think you're going to answer. I agree with Tom Cotton, he's a traitor. You, for years, until you got chosen by President Trump, have celebrated this guy as brave. You've called for him to be pardoned, for his charges to be dropped. I cannot imagine a director of national intelligence that would say that kind of behavior is okay. How would we maintain the trust of the IC and the contractors who work for it? How would we maintain the trust of our Five Eye partners? I find it very troubling. Let me move to 702. I know other members are going to raise this. Remember, the 702 is critical to our national security. 60% of the president's daily brief, 60% of the information President Trump gets every day in a PDB will come from this. You've had a long history of opposing 702. Many members of Congress have. But one of the things you actually done that not many have is not to reform it, but you actually said you wanted to repeal it. But now, whether it's confirmation conversion or whatever, you call 702 vital. And I'm quoting, because of significant FISA reforms have been enacted since you left Congress. Ms. Gabbard, what are the reforms that have led you to now support 702?
In the short time that I have, Senator, I will just note that my actions in legislation in Congress were done to draw attention to the egregious civil liberties violations that were occurring at that time.
Ms. Gabbard,
Some of
Ms.
the-
Gabbard, I ask you a question. Please give me the courtesy of responding. You said the reforms now make you support it. What, can you cite which reforms?
There are a number of reforms to include
In the new
getting
bill,
rid.
in the new law, right?
That all
right.
of you and your
Ms.
wisdom.
Gabbard, my time is getting short. But I got to just tell you, after the reforms were passed into law in April of '24, you went on Joe Rogan's podcast in May. The bill is now law. And you said, quote, "This bill took an already bad problem and made it many, many times worse." Again, in my mind, this is a question of judgment. 702 is critical. I appreciate this late conversion, but I'm not sure I buy it because you've had such a consistent position. Again, I know my colleague's going to raise these, but rather than standing up to dictators like Putin and Assad, you've sometimes amplified his talking points. I mean, I just do not understand how you can blame NATO for Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And when Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, you didn't condemn him. I can go through all the quotes. You actually questioned Americans' intelligence. Now, you mentioned a lot about trust. And one of the things that I'm so proud on this committee is my friend Senator Burr said, we always follow the truth. I say on this committee, the most valuable work I do in this Senate, we have a bipartisan approach to intelligence. I think we have worked to try to keep the intelligence community and earn their trust, and frankly, earn the trust of the American people. But I, respectfully, ma'am, I just don't believe on your judgment and credibility issues that this is the appropriate role that you should take going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gabbard, Edward Snowden does stand out as having done particularly grave harm to our national security by revealing top secret information, including sensitive sources and methods, thus jeopardizing agents in the field. So let me ask you a question. If confirmed, would you support or recommend a pardon or any kind of clemency for Edward Snowden?
Thank you for the question, Senator Collins. If confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, my responsibility would be to ensure the security of our nation's secrets and would not take actions to advocate for any actions related to Snowden.
So the answer is no. Is
Correct.
that correct? In 2020, you introduced the Protect Brave Whistleblowers Act, which would amend the Espionage Act to make it more difficult to prosecute individuals who reveal classified information. In particular, the bill would allow individuals to disclose even top secret information as long as it's not done with the specific intent to injure the United States or advantage any foreign nation. Your bill would also have created an affirmative defense if public disclosure of classified information were made for several reasons, one of which was to expose gross waste of funds. I strongly oppose this legislation, which would hamper our ability to prosecute people who give our adversaries classified information. So let me ask you this. Ms. Gabbard, do you still support providing individuals who have access to top secret information with the ability to make their own decisions regarding whether that information should be publicly disclosed, even though disclosure may cause tremendous harm to our country or our allies?
Senator, we cannot and should not have individual vigilantes within the intelligence community making their own decisions about how and where and when to expose our nation's secrets. The intent of the legislation that you have pointed out was pointed towards ensuring due process for those who are charged under the Espionage Act in a court of law. This is a law that has been abused in some cases and used for political purposes. President Obama charged more people under the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined. If confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, my sole focus and goal would be our nation's security, which includes ensuring the security of our nation's secrets. And I would work to make sure that we don't have any disclosures or vigilantes taking it upon themselves. There are numerous legal paths that will protect this information for those who feel they have concerns. And I look forward to working with you and this committee on making sure that those protections are known by every single person in the workforce and effectively implemented.
So you do not support allowing individuals to make their own decisions without authorization to disclose secret information, classified information?
Yes, and I believe we have the legal structure in place for those who have concerns to address them.
As you know, there has been speculation in the press that you met with Hezbollah, a terrorist organization affiliated with Iran. Have you ever knowingly met with any members, leaders, or affiliates of Hezbollah?
No, and it is an absurd accusation.
Let me ask you one final question in the short time we have left. With Hamas, ISIS-K, the Houthis, all the Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq, Yemen, and Al-Qaeda all posing general resurgences in the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia, I'm alarmed at the lack of focus by the IC on this threat to our safety. We don't want to have to call you back to this room after a terrorist attack and ask, how did the IC miss this? Great power competition, China, Russia, definitely pose threats to our country, but the terrorist threat is arguably the most imminent threat, according to former FBI Director Chris Wray. If confirmed, what would be your strategy to refocus the IC on the terrorist threat to our country and to Americans abroad?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with your assessment, and this speaks to the need for the ODNI to exist, to redirect those resources, identifying the gaps in intelligence so that we are able to get ahead of these threats instead of coming around after the fact and trying to assess why did we not know about this sooner so that we could have taken action to prevent it.
Thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you.
I am going to try to get 4 questions in, so I'll be brief, and if you can reciprocate, that would be very much appreciated. We've been talking about Section 702, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and I believe it's critical that the DNI support additional reforms to protect the privacy of law-abiding Americans. In your written response to committee questions, you wrote, and I quote, "Warrants should generally be required before an agency undertakes a U.S. person query of Section 702. Is this your current position?"
Yes, it is, Senator. And as you'll note in that written response, I noted some exigent circumstances with which there may be other options. But I also want to make a note that a simple warrant requirement is ultimately going to be a policy decision that all of you will make. I would point to history, to some examples.
Time is short. I'm glad you answered in line with your written answer that you support a warrant. Section 702 also involves a huge loophole now that was included recently that could allow the government to force anyone with access to a Wi-Fi router or cable box to secretly participate in the warrantless surveillance program. Do you support, as I do, eliminating this language?
Senator, I would have to look more into that and assess, if confirmed, what the impacts of the implementation of the existing safeguards are and come back to you in Congress as you look at reauthorization.
It is a massive loophole, and I hope to hear, after you've looked at it, that you'll be supportive of my efforts. Let me turn now to the question of the Inspector General situation. Can the President of the United States refuse to fund the Inspector General for the intelligence community despite appropriations from Congress? And here I'd like a yes or no.
Senator, I don't know about the legal authorities, but I understand the essential role that the inspectors general play. And if confirmed, look forward to empowering our Inspector General to fulfill their responsibility.
Good, because Congress either has the power of the purse or it doesn't. And I think in your answer to me, you recognize that you have an independent obligation to follow the law. I think that's a constructive answer. Let me turn now to the matter of spying on journalists. You wrote in your response to the committee questions that you support the Biden administration Department of Justice's policy restricting the collection of reporters' records, and you called for the codification of those restrictions. Will you reconfirm that position this morning?
I believe strongly in the First Amendment, which protects a free press.
So you will, in effect, say that you will continue to support the Biden administration policy to protect journalists?
I'm not familiar with the specific Biden administration policy, but I believe strongly in the defense of the First Amendment.
It is a policy that restricts the collection of reporters' records, and you have called for the codification of those records, so I am going to accept that you're not changing your position, and I appreciate it. I've got time, I think, for one more question. While you were in Congress, you introduced legislation prohibiting the government from mandating that Americans' phones or apps include mechanisms to allow the government to bypass encryption or other privacy technology. In your written responses to the committee questions, you reconfirmed your opposition to these mandates. Is that still your position?
Yes, these back doors lead down a dangerous path that can undermine Americans' Fourth Amendment rights and civil liberties.
You are being very helpful by moving so quickly. Let me turn to whistleblowers. You wrote in your response that whistleblowers must have clear, protected channels to report concerns, including the unauthorized transmittal of classified information to appropriate entities such as members of Congress. Do you agree that IC whistleblowers must have a clear path to this committee and that they don't need permission from agencies to talk to us? That's a yes or no.
Senator, the answer is clearly yes. I would like to state a few other actions I would take if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence is, number one, make sure that we don't have illegal and unconstitutional programs within the intelligence community, making sure that we enact security clearance reform to limit access to our nation's top secrets, make sure that every single person in the workforce understands their rights as whistleblowers and the legal channels to take, which would include coming directly to you as members of Congress, as well as establishing a direct hotline to myself should they choose to take that path.
One last question, if I might. Would you support the declassification of the committee's full report on the CIA's torture program?
Senator, I believe in transparency. I have not seen this, and so cannot make an honest assessment for that answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Welcome, Ms. Gabbard. Congratulations and thank you for your service to our nation. I hope you will take to heart the chairman's comments about the exploding bureaucracy, not only in the government generally, but in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. This is a critical role to be played, but unfortunately that role is not made easier or more effective by such a large, unwieldy bureaucracy. Do you believe that the President of the United States should get all of the lawfully collected intelligence that's available in order to inform his judgments as Commander-in-Chief?
Senator, not only is the answer a strong yes, I would say that it is the Director of National Intelligence responsibility to make sure that the President has access to all the intelligence so that he can make the best informed decisions for our country.
And you will be the one actually briefing him on a daily basis, correct?
That's correct.
And the president's daily brief, and we've heard that that is composed of about 60% of it's composed of information gleaned by collection under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I've heard your comments to Senator Wyden and others. You and I talked about the importance of getting dissenting views in front of the president so that we don't have groupthink, which can be very dangerous, particularly in the intelligence collection areas. And I appreciate your agreeing that presenting the policymakers, including the president, with dissenting views is very important. Are you aware that overwhelmingly the courts that have looked at a challenge to Section 702 based on the Fourth Amendment and any potential warrant requirement have overwhelmingly said that the Fourth Amendment is not implicated by search of lawfully collected intelligence?
I am aware, yes, Senator.
And do you disagree with that?
What I began to say in answer to Senator Wyden's previous question on this issue is, number one, the decision about a warrant requirement will be yours to make, not mine as the Director of National Intelligence.
You'll be the Director of National Intelligence, and people will be wanting to hear from you about what we should do as policymakers. Admittedly, you're not going to be a policymaker, but you certainly will inform us. And wouldn't you do agree that the courts have overwhelmingly held that a warrant is not required, correct?
Yes, Senator, I'm aware of the court rulings. What my commitment is to make sure that we uphold the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans in protecting against unlawful seizure and search. There are many different ways to do this. The devil is in the details. There are examples of how even in situations under Title I where a warrant is required to surveil a U.S. person.
Title I is different. I agree.
Correct.
I agree with you on that.
But my point,
and
Senator,
that
if I may
was
just
misused-
finish.
Excuse me. If that was misused in the case of Carter Page and basically an FBI lawyer lied
Right.
In order to secure that warrant.
Which is why there are safe.
What would be necessary to be shown in order to establish probable cause to a judge in order to obtain a warrant?
Again, Senator, that's not for me to say. That would be for you all to decide and for the Attorney General to weigh in on.
Do you know what the elements of probable cause are and whether that's a practical and workable solution?
This is the center of the debate, the high standard of probable cause that's required to get a warrant, and why this will continue to be a conversation, again, with the Attorney General weighing in and all of you in Congress making this policy decision.
The CIA director, John Ratcliffe, said during his testimony before this committee that he believed that a warrant is not only required by law, but is actually impractical. Do you disagree with that or agree with that?
I will be in a better position to make an assessment on the practical implications of this if confirmed as DNI. My commitment remains to uphold the Constitution and Americans' Fourth Amendment rights.
Where would the warrant be sought? Would it be in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or would it be in some other Article III court?
My understanding is that it would be in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
Are you aware of the fact the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court has held that a warrant is not required?
I am aware.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome. You traveled to Syria and Lebanon in January 2017. Bassam Kawam personally paid for that trip, and Bassam and his brother Ilyas accompanied you to both Lebanon and Syria. The Kawam brothers have links to the Syrian Social Nationalist Party, an ally of Hezbollah. And in fact, in 2008, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party participated in the assassination of a former Lebanese prime minister and assisted Hezbollah in Beirut. When did you become aware of the links between the Kawam brothers and the Syrian Social Nationalist Party?
Senator, thank you for your question. Just a point of clarification. I paid for my own expenses and travel on that trip. I was not aware of any accusations of these two Lebanese Americans associations until after the trip occurred.
And
I
that's
point-
when you reimbursed?
Correct.
Because
Correct.
'Cause
Not,
originally-
not because of, I wanted to make sure that there were no perceived conflicts of interest. I addressed this specific question to these Lebanese Americans who had organized the trip, and they vehemently denied any associations with that group.
There is not a great deal in the public record about what you and Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad discussed for so long in January of 2017. And I think there's a great deal of interest from the American people about what was discussed in that meeting. So what did you talk about? And did you press Assad on things like his use of chemical weapons, systematic torture, and the killing of so many Syrians?
Yes, Senator. Upon returning from this trip, I met with people like then Leader Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, talked to them and answered their questions about the trip. And quite frankly, I was surprised that there was no one from the intelligence community or the State Department who reached out or showed any interest whatsoever in my takeaways from that trip. I would have been very happy to have a conversation and give them a back brief. I went with former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who had been there many times before and who had met with Assad before. A number of topics were covered and discussed, and to directly answer your question, yes, I asked him tough questions about his own regime's actions, the use of chemical weapons and the brutal tactics that were being used against his own people.
Were you able to